Luke 19. All right. Before we begin, let me just say that something has occurred here within this group that absolutely delights me. Both Richard Fletcher and Benjamin Ho have gone and just started gutting out some of the material that I went over, and I think have come to some remarkable conclusions that I will be incorporating into my own thinking about some of the parables there in Luke 16. And so I want to thank both those guys for doing that. That's the kind of engagement I'm hoping to see eventually from just about everybody, where you're able to get into that biblical text and begin playing with it. And I don't mean just in a random fashion. I mean actually looking for the elements of structure or style or content that's there, and to massage it. When I get to my interpretation today of a particular text, it took me a while to land there because I couldn't make the connections. And then I said, Michael, you've got, if Richard and Benjamin can do this, you can do this. So I wrestled and wrestled and wrestled with the text until the light bulbs went on, and I said, bada boom, bada bing. That's all it took, was a very serious, elongated, meditative, reflective wrestling with the text. So let's begin. Luke 19 is a very interesting chapter. We're going to move from Zacchaeus to the parable of the talents. We then move into the triumphal entry and Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. It's a fascinating flow of text. But before we do that, let's share our screen here. And let's go back and remember this particular structure that we are now coming to a conclusion on. We've been at this structure going all the way back to the end of chapter 9 for quite some time now. And we've talked about it in light of the prophet like Moses theme from Deuteronomy. And we noted that the prophet like Moses would have to articulate the stiff-neckedness of his hearers and his interlocutors like Moses did. And we've seen how Jesus is time and again mediating the voice or the will of the Father, instructing, warning, admonishing, and calling to repentance. He's trying to get people to change their way of thinking. They reject him and kill him. And then we do have, from time to time in the Gospel of Luke, these texts about the therefore, or the consequence, when destruction will rain down on the crooked nation, which of course happens in 70 CE. And whether or not we are to read this as an eschatological kind of prophecy, I think you could, because the same phenomenon, the same mimetic phenomenon, the rivalries and the increase in violence, it leads to the same thing either way. It led to the downfall of Jerusalem, as we'll see today. And it could certainly lead to the end of civilization as we know it, because we have more than just swords. We have nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. So that word of warning, I think, is still intact. If we don't stop our hurting each other and killing each other, we're just going to end up going back and wiping ourselves off the planet. But nevertheless, that warning does not have to do with some kind of eternal conscious torment nonsense. So I'll leave that there. Now, with the Zacchaeus story, it begins in chapter 19. He entered Jericho. Now, Jericho's just outside the city limits of Jerusalem, a couple of miles. Okay, so Jesus is very, very close to Jerusalem at this point. And there's Zacchaeus. He's a tax collector. You know the story. He climbs the tree because he's short. Jesus says, Zacchaeus, I'm eating at your house today. Zacchaeus goes in and receives him joyfully, does the feast. And and when they, whoever they are, presumably, again, some of these Pharisee type opponents, saw it, they murmured, he's gone in to be the guest of a man who's a sinner. And Zacchaeus immediately, having been labeled a sinner, says, Lord, I'm giving away half of what I have, and if I've defrauded anyone, I'll restore it fourfold. And notice that Jesus says, today, salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. Jesus is linking Zacchaeus back to the category of Abraham and election, okay, calling him a son of Abraham now ties Jesus as close to the father of the faith, as ties Zacchaeus as close to the father of the Jewish faith as you can get. Then to be called a son of Abraham or a daughter of Abraham was a self-designation in Judaism. Jesus here identifies him as such. And then you have the tagline, for the true human came to seek and save the lost. Okay, very simple story. Don't want to make too much of it. We've talked about it before. What is Zacchaeus' salvation? A recognition that in the kingdom, in the reign of God, where God reigns, wealth is to be used to care for others. And if there's disposable wealth left, why, if one has acquired it egregiously so that it's mammon, then one pays back, in a sense, with interest. Okay, there's nothing here in this parable about a preferential option for the poor. Again, this is not a criticism of wealth. Jesus critiques wealth by critiquing those who have a poor or misguided orientation to it. But wealth as a thing is irrelevant, I think, for Jesus. It's the orientation one has toward it that is everything. Well, that's the Zacchaeus story. Now, that was pretty simple. Now we come to this most interesting parable. If you have a synopsis and you're able to put Matthew, Mark, and Luke side by side, Mark has one saying in the little apocalypse of Mark 13. That saying is like this: it is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to keep watch. That's it. That's that little saying in Mark. Now, as I've mentioned before, Matthew is in a most extraordinary midrashist on the Gospel of Mark. He's able to take something small and elaborate on it in good rabbinic midrashic fashion and create something else entirely. Again, on the assumption that Matthew uses Mark and Luke uses Mark and Matthew. On that assumption, let's then turn and look at Matthew's parable for a second. For it will be as when a man going on a journey called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his ability. Now, in order to understand this, you have to understand a talent is between 60 to 90 pounds of metal, depending on the precious metal. 1 talent was equivalent to about 20 years' wages. So when he gives the first guy 5 talents, he's giving him 100 years worth of wages. The second guy gets 2 talents, that's 40 years worth of wages. The last guy gets 1 talent, that's 20 years worth of wages. He goes away. The one who had received the 5 talents went and started making trades with them. And he made 5 more talents. This is the guy that had 2, did the same thing. The guy that had 1 dug a hole in the ground and buried the money. The master comes back. When he'd received the 5 talents, from the guy that had 5 talents, and then he gave the master 5 more, the master said, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the 2 talents guy comes forward, gives his 2 talents plus 2 more. The master says, well done, good and faithful servant. I will enter into the joy of your master. I'm going to set you over much. The guy with 1 talent, and this is Matthew, comes in and says, Lord, I know you to be a hard man, reaping where you do not sow and gathering where you do not winnow. So I was afraid. I went, hid your talent in the ground. Here's your talent back. But the master said, you wicked and slothful servant, you knew I did that I reap where I don't sow and gather where I've not winnowed. Then you ought to have invested my money at least with the bankers. So he's saying the steward, or I'm sorry, the steward, the guy with the one talent, and the master and the other two servants, they're all acknowledged here that this guy makes money off the backs of others. Okay, he makes mammon, he makes illegal or ill-gotten wealth. The master even says this. And he says, if you couldn't do that, you could have put it with the bankers and I could have accrued some interest. But you didn't even do that. And so from everyone who has, more will be given. He will have abundance. From one who doesn't have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. This is that eternal conscious torment stuff from 2nd Enoch. Their men will weep and gnash their teeth. Matthew has this parable in chapter 25, his eschatological discourse, okay? It is meant to frame what Matthew perceives as disciples who do not apply themselves to discipleship. That's how Matthew's framing this. And he's basically saying worthless disciples get cast out and burnt up. They're useless. They're absolutely useless. Now let's look at Luke's form of this particular parable. As they heard these things, he proceeded to tell a parable because he was near to Jerusalem and because they supposed the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. Notice Luke's going to give you the clue here. When I was working this text, it took me a long time before I picked up on this clue here. There's two reasons he's telling the parable. He's getting near Jerusalem. Whatever's going to happen, Jerusalem's the central place. This is all going to happen. And the second is they supposed the kingdom of God was happening immediately. What are they expecting? They are expecting a revolution, a holy war. This is what they're expecting. Keep this in mind. He said, therefore, a nobleman went into a far country to receive a kingdom and then return. Calling 10 of his servants, he gave them 10 minas. And a minas now is worth about, I believe it's 100 days' wages, okay? In other words, if Matthew has expanded hyperbolically the amount of money the master's given these guys, Luke has shrunk it down. So it's still a significant amount of income, but it's not this exorbitant amount of income. Calling 10 of his servants, he gave them 10 minas, and he said, trade with these till I come. His citizens hated him, and they sent an embassy after him saying, we don't want this man to reign over us. When he returned, having received the kingdom, he commanded these servants to whom he had given the money, and he called to him that they might know what they had gained. The first came and said, Lord, your pound has made 10 pounds more. He said, well done, good and faithful servant. You shall have authority over 10 cities. And the second came and said, look, Lord, your pound has made 5 pounds. And he said, could you be over 5 cities? Another came saying, Lord, here's your pound, which I kept in a napkin, for I was afraid of you because you're a severe man. You take up where you do not lay down, and you reap what you do not sow. He said to him, I will condemn you out of your own mouth, servant. You knew I was a severe man, taking up where I did not lay down and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not put my money into the bank? And at least at my coming, I should have collected interest. And he said, take the pound from him and give it to him who has the 10 pounds. But as for these enemies of mine who do not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slay them before me. Do you notice the significant differences in this parable from Matthew? Not only do we have the scaling down of the size of the investments, Matthew just has simply that it's anybody. It's an anybody that goes on a journey. and he sets the servants up over the house, says, take care of it and make some money, and when I get back, we'll settle accounts. Whereas in Luke, it's a nobleman. And in Luke, there's an embassy. And in Luke, the citizens hate this guy, and this embassy evidently is going somewhere to receive recognition for a kingship. He's trying to get a higher authority to grant him that kingship. And when he gets it and he comes back, then he goes to settle accounts. And at the end, the guy with the 1 talent says, I know you're a severe man. I hid it in a napkin, and he ends up getting killed. So when I was struggling with this particular parable, and I went to the parable books on the parables, they sort of sometimes perhaps wrestle with this, but then most of those parable scholars also assume that Second Temple Jewish eschatology with a very bad ending, because I don't see that in the gospel. I had to ask, what is this parable doing here between Zacchaeus and the next text, which is the entry into Jerusalem? What's going on? Well, the good news is the scholars are well aware that there's a story where Archelaus, who ruled over a region, one of Herod's 4 sons, got into a skirmish with Herod Agrippa, who also wanted to rule that territory. And Agrippa went to Rome to go ask Caesar for the crown. And a delegation of Jews, and this is recorded in Josephus and I believe Philo as well, a delegation of Jewish leadership follows Herod to Rome and is begging the Roman authorities not to confer the kingship on him. They preferred Archelaus. Well, Herod gets granted the kingship because he has more money to bribe the Roman authorities, and he comes back. And we know that the Herodian dynasty were not a merciful dynasty. And they would have done something like this. They would have, like politicians all over the world do, they go after their enemies and get rid of them. It's the first thing they do when they win elections. So Jesus, for Luke, this parable of Matthew's, which has to do with discipleship, is absolutely transfigured now into the story of Archelaus and Herod Agrippa. Archelaus lost. Okay, I don't recall if he was executed after that or not, but Archelaus lost. Herod took the kingship, and the story continues. The master in the parable, in this case, the king who's received this kingdom, now settles accounts, just like in the Matthean parable. But the question arises in Luke's gospel. Are we to understand the master as a good figure or as a bad figure? Why? What does it mean when the servant says, I know you make money illegally, so I took your talent and hid it in the ground? And then this is where the insight hit me like a ton of bricks. The Jesus figure in the text is the guy that refuses to take this minas, or this talent. He's the guy that refuses to do it because he knows that it's going to gain interest or income through ill-gotten manner, and so he refuses to participate in that economic system. Now, when Jesus said in the Zacchaeus narrative, today salvation has come, the disciples heard that now the kingdom of God is coming to Jerusalem, and Jesus has to check them. He has to help them understand that he's not in the role of this king that's going to come in and usurp authority. Okay, they don't understand that he's not going to start a holy war. They won't even get that after he's been arrested. But Jesus in the text, it seems to me Jesus in the parable is wanting us, and I'm saying in Luke's parable, Luke's form of the parable, is wanting us to recognize that it's the servant that refuses to participate in empire that will die. The one who refuses to become king by using mammon, perhaps buying off the goodwill of some others so he can get elevated in social status or anything else. This servant refuses to participate. Why? Because he knows the king is Janus-faced. He's a severe, punishing figure. I wonder if we might not see in this an almost explicit rejection of a deity type figure here, a deity who works on transactions. I'll leave that for Richard and Benjamin and the rest of you to go kind of tease out here. But it seems to me that if we have the king coming in the triumphal entry, and you have this announcement of salvation, and then the disciples' misunderstanding, Jesus, I think, is having to frame for them that he is a king, but not in the way the disciples want, and certainly not in the way that the people will want. Fair enough. Now we move to the final part of the ministry in Jerusalem. Now, when you compare the triumphal entry in the four Gospels, there are similarities and there are differences. And again, one of Matthew's midrashic techniques is to have Jesus fulfill prophecies literally. And so Matthew, at the end of this, go get the colt thing, go tell the guy the Lord has need of it. Matthew has the fulfillment of a prophecy. Tell the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on an ass and on a colt, the foal of an ass. So when they go in Matthew, they pick up both the colt and the foal. And then in Matthew has Jesus sit astride them, which would be very uncomfortable because one is tall and one is short, but somehow Jesus manages to sit astride both. That's just Matthew's midrash. Because he believes the Zechariah text predicts two animals, he's going to have two animals in his narrative, okay? Whereas this may well be just simple parallelism. He shall come to you mounted on an ass. Less than that, on the colt, the foal of an ass, the smallest animal there is. And again, you've heard this before, but when Jesus comes into Jerusalem, he doesn't do it on a war horse. He does it on this little burro. That's what he does. So the actual text itself remains consistent across the three synoptic gospels. Then you get, they went away, they found the colt, they brought it back to Jesus, and they begin throwing their garments on the colt, make it comfortable for Jesus, give him a saddle, and they rode along, and it says they spread their garments on the road. I don't know. Matthew has the crowd spreading their garments and others cutting branches from trees. It's a kind of the red carpet treatment here for Jesus as he enters the city. It says, as he was drawing near at the descent to the Mount of Olives, this is Luke now. The multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works they had seen, saying, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Luke omits the Hosanna of both Mark and Matthew. There is no Hosanna here, okay? And there's a double Hosanna in both Mark and Matthew. It starts with Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest. Now listen to what Luke does. Blessed is the King, there's the emphasis. We're dealing with kingship here. Not blessed is he, but blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Does that remind you of anything? Does that remind you of the infancy narratives in the angels? Peace on earth and goodwill toward men, glory to God in the highest. It's a little echo. It's a little echo found way back in that infancy narrative here, because the king is now coming into Jerusalem. Just as the king enters the world and the angels rejoice, so now the king is coming into Jerusalem, and the people sing that same angelic chorus. This is really important, because it's going to be the same group or mob or whatever you want to call it that's going to end up turning around in a week, less than a week, and chanting "Crucify him." So we now have the triumphal entry. Okay, Jesus comes in, and some of the Pharisees in the multitude said, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." And he said, "If I told them to be silent, the stones around you on the ground would cry out." Okay. Now we have the lament over Jerusalem, completely peculiar to Luke from his source L. He drew near the city and he wept over it, saying, "Would that even today you knew the things that make for peace." What's the emphasis in the text? Kingship, violent kingship, peace and peacemaking, which have been a big dynamic in the central section. But now these things are hid from your eyes. And we now have this warning. The day shall come upon you when your enemies will cast up a bank around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and dash you to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. The king had entered Jerusalem. He was coming in, and Jesus knows that he will be rejected. And as a consequence, they will not know how to make peace. Because they don't know how to make peace, the zealot movement will grow and grow and grow for the next 30 years until it culminates in the war against Rome, and Rome will come in under Titus. They will build siege works that take several years, and they will decimate the city and the temple. There's one more saying here. Oh, the section, the cleansing of the temple. Now, Luke's version of the cleansing is much, much shorter, much briefer than that of Mark or Matthew. We'll read you Luke first. He entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of robbers." It's very simple. Walks into the temple, starts driving out people selling sacrifices. That's all he does. And he says, this is meant to be a house of prayer. You've turned it into the translations will say den of robbers. It's actually leistes here. And leistes, it's a term used for bandits and robbers, but it's also used for zealots. And if you're a zealot, how do you make money to finance your zealot movement? You resort to robbing on the highway. That's a common practice. Now that's all Luke has in terms of the cleansing of the temple. He has none of that. He begin, as Mark would say, those who sold and those who bought. He overturns the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry a sacrificial vessel through the temple. Same with Matthew. Not so Luke. It's a very kind of sedate scene in which he's simply kicking out the merchants. And then, of course, the Gospel of John has him braiding a whip and driving the animals out. So, but from Luke's perspective, none of that is important. What's important is the economic element, those who are doing the selling of sacrifices. Why? What kind of a God requires sacrifices? A severe God requires sacrifices. Okay. And then finally, the chapter will conclude with, he was teaching daily in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the principal men sought to destroy him. Here we go. There with this death, he's got to die. He's got to go. But they couldn't find anything they could do, for all the people hung on his words. So now they have to figure out how they're going to get to him. And then they also have to figure out how they're going to get the crowd on their side. That's what they have to do in the next 4 days in order to accomplish getting rid of Jesus before Passover. So Luke is now setting you up for what has to happen in these next 4 days. But as we look at the whole text from beginning to end, starting with Zacchaeus and going all the way through the those who sell in the temple, and we look, almost every section we're dealing with is economic in nature. And we go back to the 2 previous chapters and think of all the parables that had forms of economy of exchange in them. This is so important for Luke, okay? And I think as Luke rewrites the parable of the talents, he does so using the well-known story of Herod Agrippa to show that this is not the kind of king he's going to be, because that's not the kind of God his father is. So as he moves now into Jerusalem and into the death trap, we have come to the end of this large central section on what it means to follow Jesus. We've seen over and over throughout this section the importance of nonviolence and forgiveness, reconciliation with the enemy, that God goes to the enemy. We've seen all of that, and we've seen the people reject it. And I should say the scribes and his interlocutors reject it time and again and again and again. And eventually Jesus has to weep. And he says, you know, these things have been hidden from you. If you can't see, I can't explain why you can't see. They must be hidden from you. And so we've come to the end of this section, and now I'm curious. And this was once I popped the cork on that parable of the talents, the whole thing then felt like a flow to me, and it certainly felt like a fitting conclusion to this large section in the central section narrative. And then now Luke has come back to the Markan framework as he moves into the Passion narrative. And that was quick. You may unmute yourselves as you wish. It's funny, there are times I have so much going on in my head, I think I'm going to take forever. And then there are times I think I don't have much to say and I carry on for an hour.
Well, the thing I've been seeing is better ways of reading from the point of view of the victim.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard the one guy be positioned favorably.
Right.
You know, and because we're all power oriented.
Right.
And so I appreciate, I mean, it's almost like a flag. You should be able to look at the guy who's losing and read it from his perspective. So.
Yeah.
Yes, I think what I agree with you, Lynn, and I'm having to get my head around it, but I wondered whether there was a significance about the fact that in the parable, the boss goes away to find his kingdom. Goes to Rome.
Just like Agrippa did. Agrippa had to leave Palestine, go to Rome, and to beat out, because Archelaus already had sent a delegation. And so Agrippa sends his, and then the citizens will send their own group for Archelaus and against Agrippa.
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to?
That is what I'm referring to. Yeah, that there's enough there for the crowd to realize that they would expect their king to come to Jerusalem,
Mhm.
but actually the king has gone to a faraway land to get. The nobleman's gone to a faraway land to get his kingdom. That's, that sounds wrong, doesn't it? So
Well, yeah, because where does Messiah's kingship originate from? This is the
Jerusalem.
question from God, right? If,
Well, that was the first thing I was thinking, that actually, until you gave your very persuasive point about Archelaus, Agrippa, and Rome, that Jesus was saying, I'm going to the cross to get my kingship. I'm
Mhm.
going kind of through and beyond Jerusalem to get it. I'm going not to the temple, but I'm going beyond that. But that might be stretching it. I think
I thank you for that. I would not have thought of using those words. I'm going to the cross to get my kingship, but I think that's precisely how this is to be understood.
yeah. So I'm going beyond the temple, really. Yeah. I'm going away. I'm going. You think that the temple is where you meet with God. I am going away from the temple to somewhere else to get my kingship.
Right.
I think the thing that had struck me before today, and I nearly posted on it, was the gap between the rich young ruler and Zacchaeus, because if two things really, if you take the rich young ruler as ending where most people think it ends, which is how difficult it is for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven,
Mhm.
then in a sense you've got a straight up new law of divest yourself of your riches, be an ascetic, be a pauper. But then there is the business of what's impossible for man, which of course is an interesting thing for Jesus to say, is then possible for God. Presumably, he's referring to himself. And then having said it's impossible for God, he then goes straight into predicting his death.
Yes.
So somehow what is impossible for God is going to be tied up with his death.
Yes.
And of course, the disciples are completely clueless about it, but paradoxically or ironically, it's the beggar, the blind beggar, who can see who Jesus is.
Yeah, or Zacchaeus the tax collector.
Well, and then Zacchaeus, this is the next point was that, did Zacchaeus' salvation come because he did something and Jesus responded, or did Zacchaeus' salvation come because Jesus called out to him and he came?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I wouldn't want to put this in terms of eternal salvation or anything like that. You have to, what's being referred to here by salvation? Okay. And it has to do, it would be another way of saying the reign of God has come upon this household. How come? Because Zacchaeus acts like a true son of Abraham acts. And because he acts like a true son of Abraham acts, we know that God is present, God is reigning.
So why would that not count as an eschatological kind of pointer?
I'm not following.
Because I said salvation, and I was thinking eschatologically, and you said, no, you didn't think it was eschatological. It was
right. Because he used the word today, Samaron, today. Soteria, salvation, wholeness, healing, has come to this house. This man is behaving in a whole healed manner, proving he's a son of Abraham, proving that the Father reigns here.
Okay, I get it. So how would you think that the Zacchaeus story might be a commentary on the rich young ruler?
I mean, it's two different orientations to wealth, isn't it? The one has a ton of wealth and he's very, very sad. And he can't follow Jesus. But for Zacchaeus, there's something more important than all that wealth, and that's being accepted back into the commonwealth of the people of God.
It's interesting to me that the thing that Zacchaeus does sort of like comes from within him.
Yeah.
He does this not as a response to what he's been told he's supposed to do,
Right.
but and I think that's how our life is to be. Our actions are to be a response from that inner working and then working outward, and not by the instruction of the hierarchy as to how we're supposed to behave or what we're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. It would be.
I have to say, I agree with you. And although I was only hinting at it, what I was thinking was that the problem with the rich young ruler is he perceived it as a law where somehow Zacchaeus's spirit was kindled without being too charismatic about it.
Right. Well, let's note that the rich young ruler has no name. Zacchaeus has a name. Right?
Yeah.
Now, if one was to ask the historical question, how does Jesus know Zacchaeus' name? It would be because he had to pass through that toll road anytime he's going into Bethany on the other side. And he may have well paid toll every time he went through, and he got to know Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus got to know Jesus or a little bit about him. Right? Now, the invitation part is interesting, Richard, because when Jesus says, I'm having lunch at your house today, in the same, we've talked about before about how when Jesus comes into Zacchaeus' house, he's bringing honor into Zacchaeus' home, right?
Yeah.
Just like the steward who had unjustly, manipulated the accounts, brought honor to the master. So too, Jesus is bringing honor to Zacchaeus' household.
Can I contribute a bit? Hello, everyone. It's my first time speaking.
Hi, David.
Hi, Michael. I think that point is maybe a subplot in this story. The fact that it seems, you see where they are grumbling, the people are grumbling, and it seems that Zacchaeus is kind of a scapegoat for the community.
Yes.
And so there is a subplot there of
Yeah.
restoring Zacchaeus to the community as well.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yep. I mean, that's the whole point of all the healings anyways, to restore everybody back to the community. So that would also, I think you're correct in that. Yep. And welcome from Australia. It's got to be in the middle of the night.
No, actually, where I am, it's 7:45 in the morning, Friday morning. So
Are you in Sydney?
just outside of Sydney.
Oh, okay. You're on the East Coast. Oh, great.
East Coast.
All right. Well, welcome.
And thank you for making it a bit later. 12 p.m. your time is 4 a.m. my time, so that's a bit more difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could look at making all of them at 3 o'clock, I guess, but I don't know. I kind of like getting done. There are mornings where I'm champing at the bit for 2 hours waiting to get online and get it out of me because it feels like a baby. What else are your thoughts? What other thoughts do you have?
While I've got the microphone, so to speak, I just think it's fascinating, as you've said, Michael, that the parable of the talents is completely transformed by both Matthew and Luke to mean almost completely different things.
Yeah, exactly.
And we so often come to this assumption that the same parable always means the same thing. But in Matthew and Luke, they're just really very different.
Yep. Yep. And I think this really does bring us back to that fourfold Christological model of the textual Jesus, the historical Jesus, the risen Christ, the Christus Praesens, the experiential Jesus, and the Jesus of the tradition. And we can, in the textual Jesus element of this, we can allow Matthew to be Matthew. And we can allow Matthew to turn Jesus, in a sense, into a second temple Jewish rabbi, rabbinic type figure, but we don't have to say that's gospel. And we can understand why Matthew does what he does, and we don't have to throw it out of the canon. We can just recognize he can only go so far in his thinking, but he can't go all the way. I think we see that in Paul, in the Thessalonian letters, so far, makes a break with the tradition and then ends up going much further.
Can you cast any historical light on verse 27, where effectively the king coming back says, slaughter them? That would be Agrippa coming back. When would that?
Yeah, give me a second. This is from Josephus, The Wars of the Jews and the Antiquities. I'm reading from Klein Snodgrass's Stories with Intent. I told you Klein was my New Testament professor back in the day. He says these passages tell of the events following the death of Herod the Great, which would have been around 4 BCE, I believe. Archelaus and his entourage went to Rome to persuade Caesar to confer on them authority to succeed Herod as king. Antipas also made the trip as a throne claimant. In addition, a delegation of 50 Jews from Israel, joined by 8,000 Jews in Rome, appeared before Caesar to argue against Archelaus being made king. While these texts tell of Archelaus killing 3,000 troublesome Jews before going to Rome, no details on revenge of the Jewish delegation in Rome opposing him are given. But Josephus does say Archelaus, on taking possession of his ethnarchy, did not forget old feuds and treated not only Jews but Samaritans with great brutality. So Archelaus has the historical reputation before he goes and then after he returns.
But the story seems to have Jesus anticipating that Agrippa will come back and...
Well, whoever it is going to slaughter their political enemies.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Like we see in so many third world countries, you know, when one party takes over, they go out and kill the opposition, or like we see in Russia or China.
What verse 13, he called 10 of his servants. He didn't call 3 of them.
Yeah, right. The number of servants, how much is given to them changes. Everything changes. Right.
I was thinking that it's sort of like taking headlines out of a paper and taking that story and then giving it a spiritual slant, or the slant that Jesus wants you to see from it. Because this would have been like the political, people would have been aware of this political situation and what happened. And then he says, my take is much different than this.
Right. I don't know. I was just trying to see if it fit. See, I know Luke has a purpose, right? I know that. But sometimes I can't always divine that purpose. And that's why it's fun to do Bible study together as a community.
Well, I think that thing about making the villain into the hero in the 10 Talents is extraordinary. Yeah, very persuasive.
It actually came to me while I was having a bagel with strawberry and cream cheese on it.
That seems perfectly logical.
Well, it gives a certain poignancy to the fact that verse 28, he goes into Jerusalem
Mhm.
kind of knowing that they've missed the point.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So is your definition of mammon being an ill-gotten gain, is that fairly standard throughout theology?
Well, it is amongst the Aramaists, like Gustav Dahlmann, Joachim Jeremias, Matthew Black. The Aramaists recognize it as a term of ill-gotten gain. I don't know if New Testament scholars do typically,
What does the term Aramaic mean?
That's the language Jesus spoke.
Okay, like
Aramaic.
Aramaic. Okay, gotcha.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
When in verse 1 of Luke 19, he said he entered Jericho and was passing through, which way was he going, do you think? Going from east into Jericho and then out to the west?
Yes, coming in toward, yeah, he has to go, I believe he has to go through Jericho, up and around, and then up, beginning the movement up the hill to Jerusalem proper before he passed through one of the gates into the city. Now, I've never ever traced that route, Richard. I've never done that. I should.
So where was he before verse 1? What was
Yeah,
he doing?
he's on his way to Jericho. He's on the road to Jericho.
From
Presumably from the north. Remember, Luke
Okay.
wants to almost drive a straight line from Galilee right down to Jerusalem, right?
I had Jericho being out east of
I
Jerusalem.
understand that, right? And because those events took place there, they're going to have to go through Jericho. There was something I read sometime back that they had to pass through Jericho to pay the toll there before they went to Jerusalem. That's been so long since I read that, and I'm not even sure if I'm making it up anymore. But Jericho would have been a natural place to pay your tolls. Like when you get off on the highway here, they have those places you get your ticket punched, or they used to. Yeah. Well, I don't know, man. I just found that fascinating. I hope you did too.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
Maybe ones that we have to sleep on.
Okay, put them in the discussions group. I really enjoy reading all the stuff that that everybody puts in there. I can't always comment, partly because I'm on my phone and I can't sit and write a long comment like this on my phone. It just doesn't work.
Well, I did send you and a couple of people quite a lengthy thing on Luke 18.
Yeah, Richard, what I would love is if you could pull all those observations together in a Word document and then post that in the group. And Benjamin, if you're listening to this, if you can do the same thing, it would be fun for us to have your guys' thoughts and research at our fingertips when we go back through this. I would appreciate it too.
Happily, will do.
Yeah.
I didn't want to overload, but so I sent it to you and to Benjamin and Sam, but
it was great work. Just the kind of work that makes a teacher proud. Woohoo!
Yep. But it does reflect well. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Well, gang, peace and love. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Happy Valentine's Day to all the ladies out there. And yes, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week with Luke chapter 20.
Amen.
Thank
you.
you, Mike.
Bye-bye.
I'll try to sleep go. honey.